Welcome back. You're watching S8 Today. Now, according to the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, mental illness in the workplace often leads to decreased productivity, increased sick-related absenteeism, and poor work quality. Now, a study by the London School of Economics and Political Science found that in 2016, depression cost South Africa around 40 billion rand, and that's in lost productivity. To talk to us a little bit more about this during Corporate Mental Health Week, I'm now joined in our studios in Cape Town by Professor Renata Schoeman, who's a psychiatrist and associate professor at the University of Stellenbosch. Thanks so much indeed for joining us on the program, Prof. This is an important week and one that we often don't pay attention to because when we go to work, you just get on with it and then go home. But, looking at the statistics, and perhaps you can help us, mental unwellness, how much does it contribute to some of our illnesses that we experience at work?
The impact is huge, and it's very easy to look at physical conditions because people more openly speak about it, whether you develop hypertension or diabetes. But mental illness is often seen as something that we don't speak about. And as you mentioned, up to 1 in 4 of employees do struggle with stress-related conditions that can cause depression, anxiety, or, as the lay people will often say, burnout, which is not a medical disorder, but it's recently been recognized by the WHO as an occupational phenomenon.
So now we can determine that these stresses and these concomitant illnesses are as a direct result of being at work and in an environment that causes these.
Yes, absolutely. And there's many reasons why people would develop then depression or anxiety. And it is twofold. The one is obviously employee related. So if you do not take care of yourself or your resilience is low, but then also the workplace conditions, which can be anything from resource difficulties in terms of finances or time or even information. But it can also be due to toxic work environments.
All right, let's look at both of those. Let's start with the employees themselves. What can I do to make sure that I don't get too stressed at work, that I maintain a good mental state of well-being and not subject myself to stress? What do I do?
I think one of the first things that we find in today's world, we're always online 24/7. So the first thing is to start to manage your technology and have dedicated times that you're not connected with the rest of the world and especially work. And then also to look at your own physical health by exercise and healthy eating patterns and healthy sleeping patterns, but also to make time to really socialize and connect with significant people in your life.
I remember at one of my previous employers, people used to like to work through the day, and that we were forced, it was mandatory to have lunch away from your desk. You weren't allowed to eat lunch at your desk. I suppose these are recognizing the things, the habits that we can get into that contribute to these stresses.
Absolutely, and as you mentioned, we now eat at our desks with our phones on and the computers also on different tabs open.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the environment now. Let's start with our bosses. I guess they supposed to be taking care of us in many ways, but can also be contributors towards the unhappiness and stress-related environment that we find ourselves in.
Absolutely. Leaders are also human, and they should also take care of themselves firstly. If they don't take care of themselves, they can't take care of us. But sometimes leaders are also not necessarily people that behave in a nice way. And we're not talking about bullies here, but some leaders might even display symptoms of personality disorders, which can relate to cruelty and almost border on abuse of employees.
From your studies and what you come across, what are the typical behaviors in a work environment that generally lead to stressful environments that you can predict that you're heading for a problem if this carries on?
So So as I mentioned, the toxic work environment, and most of the times we can tolerate demands in terms of our energy and in terms of what we have to deliver. But where it's touching you on an emotional level, where it damages relationships or your belief in yourself, is when we run into problems. So either when there's a lot of conflict, whether it is overt or covert conflict, or when there's really people playing games or really creating strife in our office environment.
How does one fix this? Because, you know, sometimes people will just say, oh, you're being a little bit soft, you need to toughen up. How do you strike this balance between being, I don't know, tough and also looking after yourself?
I think there's two ways. We need to look at the organization first and then at the employee. If we start at the employee level, is to make sure, as I mentioned, that self-care concepts that you really need to take care of, but then also to learn to be assertive, not to react always defensive and emotionally. And although, especially if you're accused falsely, your first reaction is to react and to defend yourself, that can often escalate. So it's more important to ground yourself in reality, to create your own structure of support, to build your relationships at work, and then if needed to seek external support in terms of professional help. At an organizational level, I think we should prevent, and when we talk specifically about the culture, is be very clear about the values of the organization, and then preferably also to have a code of conduct, and then certain steps and procedures that will follow if people do not behave according to the values and the code of conduct of the organization.
If I'm a boss or a fellow employee, what are the sorts of symptoms that I should be looking out for in my employees and co-workers that perhaps might say, do you know what, Peter, listen, I think you need to slow down or take a chill or something. What are the typical symptoms of a problem that's developing?
Okay, so the first symptoms that we might see is that people work longer and longer but achieve less and less, so almost a decreased productivity. You can also note personality changes in terms like people can become more irritable, or they can become more snappy, or they start to withdraw. They don't make small talk anymore, they don't want to have a coffee in the cafeteria anymore. They really just disconnect from people. So that depersonalization where you don't feel connected, and also the decreased productivity and irritability is often signs. And then also to be alert to signs of self-medicating. Often people start to use substances, for example alcohol, to deal with their stress at work.
All right, and how does one deal with stress? Do I go for a jog in the road behind you? What do I do?
Oh, I'm always believing in exercise. The benefits is so vast, and there's recent studies again that's publishing just to show that if you should exercise at least 5 times a week, 30 minutes, it can have a massive difference. But then also really to look after your sleeping patterns. If you do not sleep enough, your stress tolerance the next day is significantly decreased.
Do you think corporates are taking this seriously at all?
I do believe that in the past couple of years, let's say 3 years, there's been a tremendous drive, especially from the University of Stellenbosch side, that we look at corporate mental health awareness as well, with workshops, and we also recently had a conference on corporate mental health awareness. And I think there's a lot of places in South Africa that followed suit with similar congresses and conferences, but there's also definitely organizations that really start to take this seriously. Some of the bigger corporate players, yes, but then also in small and medium-sized firms, especially when there's family-owned, they can really see the benefit of investing in a healthy workforce.
All right, Prof, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much indeed for your insights today. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
All right, so that was Professor Renata Schoeman from Stellenbosch University sharing her thoughts with us. It's corporate wellness.